Welcome, everybody. And today we have with us Nathan H. Green. So, Mr. Nathan, thank you for joining us. Oh, I'm sorry, I totally forgot to do drum roll, so we'll do that, and then I'll introduce you. Mr. Nathan H. Green, there we go. Thank you for your patience while I work out the technical difficulties going on here. Oh, look at the audience finally showed up. So, Mr. Nathan H. Green, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who are you, and what do you like to do besides writing, and then we'll get to your writing.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, and the writing is like what I like to do other than the other things I do in life. So I'm a corporate commercial lawyer, and that's what I call my afternoon job. And I spent a decade working at a law firm doing corporate commercial work, and writing was always the hobby for me. And when COVID hit, I kind of said, look, I got to think about life a little bit. I got to think about, what I'm enjoying spending my time doing. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to spend more time writing, and I'm going to, try to get better at it. So when you ask, what do I do aside from writing? I think my wife would be looking at me with daggers. You better not be doing something else.
So this is your full-time job now then?
So my joke is it's like my half-time job. So I write in the morning. I get up at 5 a.m. I write until 9 or 10, and then in the afternoon I practice law.
Okay, awesome, cool. It's funny. I many lifetimes ago, and when I say many lifetimes, I mean 5 years ago or something, because I'm not that old, even though I look it. I used to also work part-time, and I will say it was the most freeing experience of my life. I would get up and go to the office for 4 or 5 hours, and then I'd spend the rest of the day on the beach or writing or working out or hanging out with friends, getting beers, whatever. And it's so nice to not be sucked into a soul-sucking office, and you get to do the things that you like. So if you can afford it, people, I would highly encourage you to work part-time, or just retire early if you can also. Nonetheless, so I looked a little bit into your writing, and I'm excited to say that we have a sci-fi author with us today. I think I got that right. Sci-fi, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And forgive me, I think we're getting a tiny bit of lag or something. I'm not sure whose internet it is. My wife is watching Netflix right now, so it might be mine. I don't know. But if I stare blankly at you for a few seconds, it's not that I don't understand you. It's catching up or something like that. So tell me a little bit about your book.
Well, the one I've just launched is called Woe to the Victor, and it's a military science fiction, hard science fiction adventure story. The idea is it starts 2 minutes after the Earth's been destroyed by aliens, and we're following the survivors as they're trying to figure out A, what comes next, and B, can the war still be won, and what does that even mean within this context?
Mm-hmm. Okay, crazy. So you mentioned the Earth being destroyed. Tell me how you work that in with your characters. Do you do flashbacks to give your audience a view of what they were like on Earth, or are you strictly everything moving forward from when the Earth was destroyed?
So the book starts 5 minutes after the Earth's been destroyed, and then 3 pages later, I flash back 4 hours. So not like weeks or days or something like that, but just kind of a few hours, so that we can kind of see how those last hours played out. And I follow some of the characters through that, but the vast majority of the book is from the moment of Earth's destruction onwards. And it's you see the characters a little bit in the pre 9/11 world, but then you put them into this reality that they're in, where Earth's gone, and whatever we want to do is going to have to be on the understanding that that's happened, and there's no changing that.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And so what does the survivorship of humanity look like? Is it just a couple characters, or is there a fleet or something? Walk me through that.
Yeah, so I imagined that we'd been sending out like colony ships for a couple of months in advance of the war being lost, and something like 1 million people have managed to go into the stars. But the primary survivors around Earth are like in semi-destroyed military spaceships that these invading aliens have not totally obliterated, but they've damaged them enough that they're out of action. So that's what our survivor base looks like: military people, an engineer, and kind of a handful of civilians who've been scattered about.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So one thing that obviously is super important to readers, and probably you as an author as well, is getting to know like character motives and character arcs and stuff like that. So walk me through a little bit what some of your characters are thinking and feeling once they realize that like Earth is destroyed.
Yeah, so like the motivation question is like a fantastic question. It's something you kind of have to keep at the front of your mind while you're thinking about everything about the story. Like, just how is this going to progress? So some of my characters are very like mission objective based, where it's like, okay, look, Earth's been destroyed, but we don't want the species to die. What can we do to stave off extinction? Some of my characters are revenge-based, where they're saying, like, look, we've got a chance to take revenge on these aliens. Let's do that. Some of my characters are driven by guilt. I've got an engineer character who was like a military contractor, basically, and in part responsible for the technology not quite being good enough to fend off the aliens. And this question of, if we'd only been just a little better, could we have won the war? Could we have, staved off defeat? So I tried to kind of capture this range of conflicting motivation. So not everyone's just on the same page. They all kind of want something a little bit different.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, every real person also has different motives, different things that drive us, so to speak. What would you say are some of your main inspirational novels that you read or stories that you drew from to kind of build your own universe?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny question. So my undergraduate degree is in aerospace engineering, and a fair bit of what I take more directly from is like old engineering stories. So there's a chemical plant explosion that was based on the wrong O-ring being installed, and that I thought was cool. I thought was so cool when I heard it. That's something I want to work into my writing and I want to talk about. I really like Tom Clancy for the way he does technical action, but he's not very good for characters. So if you're a character motivated reader, you're not going to enjoy his stuff. But if you like hearing about why a tank's going to blow the top off of it and send it 30 feet into the air when it gets hit with something, that's, Tom Clancy will give you that. And if that turns your crank, Tom Clancy's just going to be ratcheting away. So I really enjoy Tom Clancy. Tom Wolfe wrote this really great book, The Right Stuff. And it's kind of like a history of the early space program. So 1960s, and the test pilot astronauts they had going into space and being the face of America, and these guys were never they were never growing up thinking that they're going to be the face of America. These are guys who were macho test pilots, and it's just bravado and the love of danger and explosions and cool stuff and setting records and being the best and fitting into this military ethos. So I found that really interesting. But you wind up taking from so much stuff. There's no. It almost it's terrible to say almost you're more influenced by things that aren't just other authors or other writing. Because when something strikes you as cool, you just put that in the back of your head somewhere. And as you're writing, it's like, okay, look, what can I share with my audience that I always thought was cool that has like a little bit of truth to it?
Yeah. No, I agree. It's interesting. Like I always ask authors the question, like where you got your inspiration from. And it's definitely okay to get your inspiration from other places. Like I am inspired by other things that I've read. But at the same time, like I want to take it and I make it my own. I don't want to just copy paste something that somebody else already did. Like I want to have my own unique flair to it. So it's definitely worthwhile to read things, but also put your own twist on it, so to speak. And going back to a little bit, you mentioned that your previous life was an aerospace engineer, and you also said that this is a hard sci-fi. So would you say that a lot of this is based in like actual science stuff, kind of like oh gosh, I just am blanking on his name right now. The guy who did like Jurassic Park and
Michael Crichton, yeah.
Michael Crichton, yeah, he was actually a scientist, and then he based a lot of his stuff on science. Would you say that your book is also like that, or do you take it to the next fantastic level?
I've never actually stopped to ask myself where Michael Crichton fits in on the hard versus soft science fiction spectrum. I've got the feeling, like I've got more of a gut feeling that he's hard science fiction, I guess. Like the Andromeda Strain is kind of soft science fiction, but then Jurassic Park is hard science fiction.
Becoming more and more hard every day, actually, which is crazy.
Right. So I guess, like I try to write hard science fiction, and in part that's because I think some of what I deliver to the audience and some of the value proposition that I can bring that someone else couldn't bring is that the engineering in this and the technical details will be interesting, and they'll give you something to chew on. And if you don't enjoy that, like if what was it in so Tom Clancy's got The Hunt for Red October, and he's talking about like the nuclear reactor in the submarine, and he's talking about a bolt like working itself loose. And I was reading that, and like every few chapters, like they'd go back to this bolt in the nuclear reactor, and it'd be getting looser and looser, and I'd just be getting more and more excited. And like, if that doesn't do it for you, like, okay, fine, my thing isn't for you. But if that does it for you, like if you like then you'll really like my stuff, because it tries to capture some of the truth and some of the learning you can get from fiction, or from an engineering perspective in fiction, and bring it to the page.
So then, going back to my previous question when I was grilling you about your characters, did you maybe not have good answers because you're more focused on an audience that would be more interested in the technical aspect of things than the character side? Not that you didn't give a good answer, but maybe like not a super deep one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that character motivations are really easy to quickly sum up. Like, I spend a lot of time on my characters because characters are the things I have the hardest time with. So there's some authors out there who the characters are the easy part for them, and they can write great characters day in, day out. One of my buddies, he says that he can hear his characters in his head, and like his monologue becomes their monologue as he's working on them. And I was like, man, I wish I could have that, because I don't. Like, I hammer away at them, and I edit, and I very deliberately look at the word choices they're using and how they're thinking about things and how they're conveying information, to try to bring them alive. And yeah, like, their motivation like matters, but their perspective is what matters even more, because motivations will shift, and really what you want to do is you want to confront them with the flaws of their motivation as the story progresses. Where like, okay, yeah, you're trying for this, but this isn't really who you are, and this doesn't really fit in with the reality of your situation anymore. And then there's going to come a point where there's going to be a conflict between that and doing what's like the right thing, quote unquote. and they're going to have to decide what they want to do. So I play around with it. I play around with it a fair bit. And so, maybe I don't start off with like the strongest individual motivations for the character. Although, like, hey, get revenge on the aliens who just destroyed the world. Like, I
That's
feel,
a good motivation.
guilty because, I didn't. Yeah, right. Like, I feel like they're driven. They're all well driven, and they push themselves ahead.
And that's a good point. Like, I think a lot of people think when they're writing characters, like, I have to know, this traumatic experience that happened to my character when they were 6 years old, and then all of the girlfriends and boyfriends that they had in high school, and now they're 40, and I need to know all the past jobs they had. And it's like, you don't necessarily need to know every single thing about your character that in depth. Like, some authors do, and more power to you, but I think kind of what you were getting at is having a good character arc, having a motivation, and then having the character realize from the beginning of the story to the end, if they were well motivated or poorly motivated, and how they end up. So, I agree with you on that. I do want to ask, though, going back to the scientific perspective that you maybe have, that some of us people who did not go to school for aerospace engineering don't have. What sort of fantastical technologies have you included in your book that maybe are nearer to us than we might anticipate?
So, I'm not even sure necessarily whether this represents something that should be taken literally. In my story, humanity's invented what I call quantum vortexes, where you can jump from one point in the universe to another instantaneously, and that's like this faster than light travel. It's a staple of science fiction. There's nothing particularly like creative or amazing about this, but what I do with it that's different is I view it as this black ball technology, and there's a podcaster I really like, Dan Carlin. And he talks about technologies. He imagines like a bag, and inside this bag are all the technologies that could ever exist. And most of them are like these little white balls. But every once in a while there's a black ball in there. And you reach in and you pull out a little white ball, and it goes, oh, look, fire. Like, that's a useful, wonderful technology. That's fantastic. Right, great. We'll put it aside. And you reach in again and you go, cell phones, great, wonderful, useful technology. You reach in again, radio signals, great, wonderful, useful technology. You reach in again, you pull it out and you go, nuclear weapons. And you go, ooh, that's, okay. I guess as long as they can only be made by nation states, like, that's fine. That's a more powerful thing. You reach in again, you pull another one out. Nuclear weapons that you can make using the things you find under a regular house's kitchen sink. No, okay, that's going to destroy humanity, right? Like, that technology right there, that's going to kill us all. We all know it would kill us all as soon as you hear it. And if we ever invented a black ball technology, we'd have no real way to rein that in or deal with it. And so I view these quantum vortexes as a bit of a black ball technology, not because of necessarily how we see it, but how it's seen by the rest of the universe, and specifically by these aliens who are invading Earth, where they look at this technology in our hands and they go, that is too dangerous for you. You've suddenly gotten the ability to hurt us. And you've suddenly got the ability to hurt us extraordinarily badly without even really thinking about it or necessarily meaning to. And that's unacceptable to us. So instead of having like the really fantastical technologies, I tried to make mine more grounded. The idea, like, the book is set, like 50 years in the future, 100 years in the future, something where the world looks like it looks like now. We understand it, but it's taken the technical progression path we've been on for the last 30 years, and it runs that forward. And it says, okay, look, what happens then?
Mm-hmm. Cool. So talking about this mode of transportation you just mentioned, you would say it's more like a jump drive where you put in like coordinates and then just appear at that location, so to speak?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Do you have like a scientific backing for any of that? Like, I mean, I could come up with one right now, but I'm just curious if you have one.
No, no. And I think you get a couple of what if, or you get a couple of gimmies as a science fiction writer, where you can just say, look, just give me the fact that we can go faster than light. Just give me the fact that we can do this. And as long as you introduce it right away at your story, you're okay. Like, you can't, ask for a gimme, once you're like, 10, 20 chapters in. So I've always been interested by this FTL question because it feels like to me the universe is an extraordinarily boring and dull place if we can't travel faster than the speed of light. Like,
Yeah.
and even to the point where, because I'm a lawyer. So even if it's a loophole in the laws of physics, right? Like, and it almost feels like that the universe is almost set up to give us this loophole. Because if you look at general relativity, as you travel faster, as you travel closer to the speed of light, time for you slows down. So if you personally just wanted to strap yourself to a giant rocket, go to 99% of the speed of light, you're totally permitted to do that. Like, nothing in physics stops you from doing that. Well, you personally could get to the other end of the galaxy in about 15 minutes. And the faster you go, the shorter that time feels, right? So, like, in your lifetime, you could explore the universe if you wanted to. The only catch is everyone behind you is long dead and dust.
Yeah.
So it already feels like there's this little bit of a loophole there where, you can't go faster than the speed of light, except practically you could, as long as you're not worried about what time it is behind you. If you build a big rocket ship and you just keep thrusting, you will cover a distance on your watch that seems faster than the speed of light on the map you had when you left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Going back a little bit to destruction of Earth, you hinted at the aliens basically taking the gun away from the toddler, so to speak, which I think is a great motive. I think a lot of people lack a sort of motive for the bad guys. Like, bad guys come, kill thing. It's like, no, you need to have something somewhat believable. So I like yours. But do you ever jump to the alien perspective more? Like, do you have any alien characters, or have them send communications to the Earthlings, or run me through this alien race, or is it just kind of this ethereal enemy?
It starts off as this ethereal enemy, and then I work to humanize them. So I'll ask you the question the alien asks in the book. So if you're answering the question honestly, if we keep going the way we're going, how long do you think humanity has on Earth? Like, until we blow through the resources of the planet, until we start a war that kills ourselves, like, do you think it's like the way we are now, like, assuming that there's not some kind of major change, how long do you think is on the clock for the resources of the planet?
Well, I think there's two answers to this. There's the cynical one, which is like less than 100 years. And then there's the optimistic one, which is things really suck right now, and things will continue to suck unless they change, but humanity is very resourceful. Resourceful, but we also procrastinate things. So we're going to wait until the very, very last minute to try and save ourselves from, I don't know, let's just take fossil fuels as an example. Let's just pretend that we realize that there is a finite end to fossil fuels in 20 years. We're going to start researching, putting more money into wind and solar and all that stuff at 18 years. Like, I guarantee it. We're going to get sucked dry for every penny. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer, and I'm an optimistic person, so I would like to think that we're going to put aside our differences, and maybe, quote unquote, maybe our generation, the millennial generation, is going to be the selfless generation that puts our own wants and needs down and says, okay, you know what? We're going to give up this, continuing the lifestyle of our predecessors to be able to let our children have a better life. I don't know. I'd like to see that, but I don't have a good answer for you.
Right, and I think you're totally right. Like you can see it as like stepping stones almost, where you say like, listen, we're going to be on the burning trees for heat stepping stone, and then we're going to go coal. And once we've cut down all the trees around England and all of the people are going to be freezing in their beds, then we'll switch over to coal. And then once coal is no good, we're all covered in soot, they're chimney fires, they're chimney sweep kids with emphysema, like then we're going to jump over to fossil fuels or oil and gas. And and then when oil and gas are about to kill us all, we'll jump over to solar. And then when something goes terribly wrong with the solar, or just like, hey, in addition to the solar, we've also been poisoning rivers, and there's no more seafood, and that makes up like a third of people's diets. So what are we going to do now? Like, we'll jump over to something else. And so you can imagine that happening, and you can hope that there's more stones. But if we ever come to the last stone, and you say, listen, it just is what it is. And like we were telling you for a while, like we were telling you for a century that, you couldn't keep doing this. Yeah. And we did. And we waited until the last minute. And then, when the music stopped, oh, wait, there wasn't another stone for us to jump to.
Well, and that's where I'm hoping that we become more selfless as a generation or a race, to look beyond our own lives that are 80 short years and think of our children. I'd like to see that, but also I think, and there's always the conspiracy of fusion, that we have fusion reactors, the capability for them, but it's been hidden by the fossil fuel companies and all that stuff. Maybe not, but I think humanity's life expectancy and quality of life could be greatly increased with free energy. And so will it take, massive amounts of solar panels? Maybe. Will it take a Dyson sphere? Maybe. I don't know, but we're never going to get to that point unless we research it now. And people are too caught up with, making the most efficient gasoline engine as opposed to, the next step of technology, the next stone, kind of like you're talking about.
Yeah. So, my alien antagonists, their position is, listen, you guys are on the last stone, right? Like we understand what the laws of physics permit, right? And you've got certain resources and you're burning through them and they're not replaceable. And you're 30, 40 years before you come to the end of the line. And when you come to the end of the line, what you're going to do is you're going to come take our stuff. And it's just what you're going to do. Like, you're not going to go quietly into the night because you've burned through your resources when there's someone else's to take somewhere else. So, anyway, so like I do care a lot about having bad guys who have believable motives and maybe turn the spotlight on ourselves a little bit too. Because, it's very rare that you find someone in the real world who says, hey, I'm a snidely whiplash kind of, mustache twirling guy. I'm going to go out and do evil today. And then I'm going to go home and I'm going to laugh about it. Now, there are people out there like that, and they can be even extraordinarily powerful people. Like I spend some time trying to imagine what Vladimir Putin could be like in his personal life aside from that. And I kind of come up blank. But, it is so not to discount the existence of those people or their power or their influence on the world, but that's just not what most people are. Mm-hmm. So when I think about who my villain's going to be, I try to make them a little more interesting than the snidely whiplash fella.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, you had briefly mentioned it before, and we started to go down that path before we started talking about your books, but tell me a little bit about your writing habits. So you write part-time, you work part-time. Do you write every day for many hours? Do you write for a little bit? Do you do, research? Tell me what that looks like for you.
Yeah, so up at 5 a.m. every single day. And I go out and I write for 4 or 5 hours a day, and that's just consistent. That's my routine. I do research, but it's kind of targeted, and so like a lot of my idea generation, like it's just other things I'm reading. Like if you read a newspaper, or, you read a scientific study, or you watch a movie and some idea pops into your head. Like one of my ideas. Do you know this television show Star Trek Enterprise?
Yeah, I think I've heard of it once or twice.
Yeah, once or twice, right? So when I first heard about that show, I made an assumption about what it was going to be in my head, and then I watched it, and it wasn't what I assumed it was going to be, and I was disappointed. But I watched it, and whatever, and I kind of forgot about it. And then years later, I thought, like, oh, wait a minute, I had this idea for what, like, Star Trek Enterprise should have been, and I like that idea, and let me use that to inspire something. So, the research, like, there's small bits of targeted research to make sure I've got details right, or make sure, like, oh, I need something to do something. Let me just, what is it that will do that? But, mostly my writing time is just straight writing. Or plotting, like not, or editing actually. Like probably 75% of the time you're editing, not actually, like not writing, but.
Mm-hmm. And this is slightly more personal of a question, so you can decline to state if you'd like, but have you been able to replace a significant portion of your income with writing this much? And I'm sure, being a lawyer, that would be a very significant amount of income, but how has that worked out for you?
Yeah, no, like, I think there've probably been like a couple of days where I made more as a writer than I did as a lawyer, but that's not like, those are kind of wild days, like, oh, I'll launch a book today, and then like, but I'll only bill like 2 hours or something of time, because I'm just like watching the sales come in, and it's like a book launch day, yay. It's, like to sell books in the volume that you need to make a significant income. That's like a really, really hard task. And I'm not sure like how you figure out how to do that, or you just catch lightning. Like there are these people 20 books to 50K, like, okay, 20 books is a lot of books. Like I mean, it's a lot of books. Right. Like, there are a lot of authors out there, like full-time authors, who don't have 20 books. Like, I don't know how many books Michael Crichton has, but, like after the first dozen, I start to go, okay, maybe Jurassic Park 2 and Jurassic Park 3. Did he write a Jurassic Park 3? Like, so, I don't know. Like, that's a lot of books to put out. So, yeah, like the economics of writing are really hard.
So it's a passion for you then?
Yeah, but hey, maybe I'll get my 20 books out and I'll be making 50K a year from writing, and fantastic. Or
well, and I think that's. Go ahead.
Oh, or you catch lightning, right? Like the other thing about like punching often is eventually you catch lightning on it, and
Yeah, and what I was going to say is I think that's everybody's goal, and I'm sure like it'd be nice to be rich, so to speak. Like I don't think people would turn that down for the most part, but I think most people do want to write because they love writing, and if they can make enough to have a relatively reasonable lifestyle off of doing something that they love, that's a win. And I mean that would be a win for me too. So if you're doing what you love every day, you can't complain, right?
Right. Although like there's a bit of it that's like a problem for society as I see it, where you say like, look, how do you have artists in society, right? Like how do you fund that, and how do you make the economic model for that mesh? And so like Stephen King's point is it takes 1 million words of practice to be a writer. Like you have to do like 10 full-length novels of practice writing. And that includes the editing on that. That's not just like hammering it out like in one crazy, wild, coked up year. Like you have to like be thinking about it. It takes a lot of time. And I can tell you that like as I've learned to write, it's something that took a huge amount of deliberate focus and attention in a way that's, more than was required to be a lawyer. Like, law school was a lot less of like, like, it's hard, don't get me wrong, like, it takes a lot, but writing is different, and it takes more, and it takes a lot more practice than law school. Like, you don't invest the amount of time in law school it would take to write 1 million edited words as a fiction writer.
So you're saying I'm choosing the wrong career.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, like, when something requires such a huge amount of investment from people, and then you say, okay, after you put in those 1 million words of practice and you launch your first book and it sells 600 copies, and that's like, $1,200 into your pocket, that doesn't make sense, right? Like, there's just something about that that's, and so, okay, are we going to rely on, like, people just mashing it out of the park and having these huge runaway successes at some point, kind of by random chance? Or, are we going to do something a little more deliberate as a society? And, look, I hate to complain about this because I'm a lawyer. Like, I don't need the money. Like, it's, I'm okay. And I feel really bad for the people who are, like, getting, like, fine arts degrees, and their ambition in life is to become a writer, and they leave university with $50,000 of debt, and they sit down in a Starbucks and they start writing, hoping that, when this gets done, they'll make money. Like, that's hard. Yeah. It's really hard. But there has to be a way to do that, right? Like, if we want to have writers and we don't just want to have people, churning out clickbait, the, top 10 hottest movies of the summer, like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I think a society can be told, a lot can be told about a society by the art that it puts out. And if there's no art, then maybe the people aren't living well enough. And if the art gets too wild, maybe they're living too well. Who knows? But let's talk a little bit about your publishing. Are you traditionally published or self-published?
Yeah, so I've got 3 books and 1 novella out, and all of those are self-published. The next thing I'm going to do, I'd like to go the traditional publishing route, and so we'll see if I can pull that off. So, like I told you, I left my law firm job to write, and I did it because I was getting good at the writing I was doing, and I realized that I needed to spend more time practicing this if I was going to take the next step up in my skill level. And, like, I'd been, while I was working, like, I'd been writing, like, 4 hours, 5 hours a week. Like, I'd get through the week, oh God, thank God it's Saturday, and the alarm would go off at 7, and I'd go, oh, and I'd get out of bed and I'd go to Starbucks and I'd write for like 2.5 hours, and then, oh, okay, gotta get home. My wife hasn't seen me all week. Like, and when you're writing like 4 hours a week, you're not going very far, right? Like, it was taking me, like 3 years to write a book, something like that. It was a very slow process. Like, now, 4 or 5 hours a day, every day. Like, so, I could probably put out 2 books a year if I was, like, really just on a run. If I didn't have to market them, I could put out 2 books a year. So yeah,
I was at the point where you're just describing, which was when I wrote my book, I was waking up at 5 every day to write before work for like an hour and a half, 2 hours max. And it did take me like 2 years to finish a book. I guess ultimately the question is, can you really focus well and have your creative juices flowing for 4 to 5 to 6 hours a day, or is some of that wasted?
Yeah, like, that was an important question for me when I started this. And no, I can just go. That's no problems. So, there's a little bit of like a split where, sometimes you have to think about plotting, right? And so, I'm sure even when you're doing this 1 or 2 hours a day, like, there's some days where you're just sitting there like, okay, wait a minute, I've got to solve this. And you might be solving that at other times in your day. And like I knew that I was. Like I was driving in and out of work, and all I was thinking about is like what I'm going to write this weekend, right? So I was more prepared for writing when I was writing. And now like like I'll wake up and it's like, okay, wait a minute, how do I solve this problem? And so there have been some mornings where I've just like sat staring at the screen going, I don't like the opening sentence of my book. How am I going to rewrite it, right? What should it be? And yeah, that's like, it's a bad feeling, but I'm sure you've had plenty of mornings where you don't get anything done because you're just like, oh, it's one bloody sentence. How do I fix this?
Yeah, my goal was to try and write at least 500 words a day. Sometimes I'd get to 1,000, but then there'd be some days I was like, I wrote like 100 and that's just all I can muster. Cool. Well, yeah, before we wrap it up, any final comments that you have?
I guess I'd just say that for me, this is something I'm extraordinarily passionate about, and I think that in writing, I found a lot about myself and a lot of like personal growth and things that have surprised me along the way. So, as much as I complained about the economics of writing, it's a great hobby. It's a great hobby, and it's a hobby that has the ability to really suck you in and turn your mind in ways you never imagined it would be turned. So I'm a big proponent of creative writing. As much as I complain about, although you've not heard me complain about law stuff, so I can do that even worse than the writing stuff.
I'm sure you can. All right, did you want to read an excerpt?
I'd love to.
Awesome. Go ahead and choose that.
So, by the way, like how long do you want me to read for? Like what's
3 to 5 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. So these are the first 3 pages of Woe to the Victor. Earth burned. Once fertile forests became glowing beds of charcoal. Cities were infernos that bled ink-black smoke over land and sea. Thousands of years of human history acted as kindling. Captain Lewis Black drifted through space and watched. It had started with lances of Moravi plasma streaking down from orbit. It was almost like watching a scalpel cut into flesh, Earth no larger than a skull. The cut, plasma slicing across the surface of the planet, was clean and red with heat. Then smoke followed seconds behind it. Inside his helmet, the shallow, gasping rattle of his breath reminded him of what his grandfather, riddled with cancer, sounded like. Most were lucky enough to remember their grandfather's kindness. Black only remembered his grandfather's fear. Fear of death, of pain, of oblivion. Black wished he felt whatever it was his grandfather had been so afraid of. It would have been better. The only other sound was a gentle hiss of air leaking from his flight suit. He made himself look again. A tourniquet just below his left elbow kept him alive, for what that was worth. His left hand was just gone. What had been his forearm had been reduced to a charred, frozen wreck. There was almost no blood. The vacuum of space had pulled it away even as the arm had burned. What flesh remained was either the gray of old dead meat or the black of char. The plastic tourniquet held blood back well enough, but air, leaking out from its imperfect seal, gave the impression that the burned stump still smoldered. The display on the right arm of his flight suit read 4930. Those numbers raced downward unnaturally fast. He guessed triple time, maybe 15 minutes left. In the blackness around him lurked a dozen Moravi ships. He had counted the lances of plasma that had murdered Earth. He knew their number even if he couldn't see them. The American and Asian East Coasts had been first. Billions would have died in minutes. It hadn't looked like much. The human suffering was far too distant to be seen, but he could imagine it, over and over again. Eventually, he would think of a library, a university, a quiet family home with a bookshelf, and ask himself if he was the last person alive to have read Mutiny on the Bounty or knew the name John Glenn. The Moravi hadn't just killed billions, they had erased everything humanity had ever done. And he saw it. It was small. It had to be over 2 miles away, but a Moravi dropship floated in the distance. An old pilot's trick. If an object moves in your field of view, you'll miss it. If it's steady, you will hit. The Moravi ship moved in on him slowly, steadily growing larger. If they wanted him dead, they would have just ignored him. They were going to capture him. Alive? Put him in a jar of formaldehyde to sit on a shelf? Put him in a zoo for Moravi children to gawk at? Torture him for information about where Earth's evacuation ships had gone? Those ships' destinations had been secret for exactly this reason. He reached up to his helmet's clasp. When Black was 9 years old, the local psychopath lived a few doors down. Paul Downey, then 14. What the fight was about didn't matter. Downey had instigated it, and Black had lost. What stuck with him wasn't the feeling of fear when Downey had won and pinned him to the ground. It wasn't even the memory of pain as Downey shattered his arm in 2 places. What stayed with Black for the next 2 decades was the feeling the second after his bones snapped, when he realized he was at the mercy of the merciless. His hand shook so violently it slipped off the clasp to his helmet. Capture could easily be worse than death. On the other hand, he chuckled at the unintended pun. Hand. He shouldn't laugh at it. It wasted air. That absurd thought that he was going to be stingy with air now made him laugh again, harder. There was no reason not to, so he sucked in as much air as his lungs would take, huge wasteful breath after huge wasteful breath. If they tortured him, he couldn't give them a hand. He laughed again, belly tightening. If they tried to capture him, he might prove to be a handful. He could try to take them single-handed. Laughing helped. His heart slowed. Oxygenated blood ran to every muscle and into his brain. His muscles calmed their trembling. Maybe there was something important in how a man lived, even if he couldn't control what happened. Perhaps that was why Project Golem had been abandoned, why he had stopped Perez. He moved his hand away from his helmet's clasp, took a few more deep, extravagant breaths. Whatever the Moravi wanted, he'd get one more chance to hurt them. He exhaled in a long breath. Jen would have thought he'd gone crazy. He hoped the Moravi hated puns as much as she had. Was there a better way to die than that?
Awesome. Give you a little round of applause here. All right. Well, thank you so much for reading that, and I'm glad to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great time.
Awesome.